The demonstration was scheduled for the ship's main arena, a massive chamber that could hold thousands of spectators. The High Council of the Zephyrian Empire had arrived in their golden ships, 12 of the most powerful beings in known space coming to witness what Commander Vextar promised would be a new era of galactic dominance. Tommy stood beside Keth Moran in the arena's preparation chamber, both of them playing their roles perfectly. The boy appeared nervous and submissive, while the serpent maintained the controlled aggression that the Zephyrians expected from their ultimate weapon. "Remember," Vextar said as he made final preparations, "demonstrate intelligence, obedience, and overwhelming capability. Show them that we have created the perfect fusion of mind and might." "I understand," Keth Moran replied in perfect Zephyrian, his voice carrying just the right amount of respect and deadly promise. The arena doors opened to reveal a breathtaking sight. Thousands of Zephyrian nobles filled the circular seating, their colorful robes and ceremonial armor glittering under the artificial lights. At the center of the highest viewing platform sat the High Council, 12 ancient beings whose combined age exceeded a millennium. "Honored Council," Vextar's voice boomed across the arena through amplification systems. "Behold the future of warfare. Intelligence without conscience, power without rebellion, loyalty without question." Keth Moran glided into the arena with fluid grace, his massive form moving like a living shadow. The crowd fell silent as they took in the legendary creature that had been the subject of fear and myth for decades. "Keth Moran," Vextar commanded, "demonstrate your knowledge of stellar navigation." The serpent launched into a detailed explanation of hyperspace travel, his voice clear and educated. The crowd murmured with amazement. They had expected a monster, not a scholar. "Now show them tactical analysis," Vextar continued. Keth Moran provided a brilliant breakdown of the arena's defensive capabilities, identifying weak points and suggesting improvements with the kind of insight that came from centuries of combat experience combined with advanced education. The High Council leaned forward with obvious interest. This was indeed something unprecedented, a weapon that could think and plan rather than simply destroy. And finally, Vextar announced with triumph in his voice, "Demonstrate absolute loyalty. Destroy the human child who trained you." The arena fell completely silent. This was the ultimate test. Would the creature value its teacher above its programming? Tommy stepped forward, his heart pounding but his expression calm. This was the moment they had planned for, the culmination of weeks of careful preparation. Keth Moran reared up to his full height, towering over the small boy. His amber eyes glowed with what appeared to be predatory hunger. "As you command," he said in a voice that carried to every corner of the arena. But instead of attacking Tommy, Keth Moran's massive head turned toward the viewing platform where Commander Vextar stood. "However, I choose a different target." Before anyone could react, the serpent launched himself upward with incredible speed. His powerful coils wrapped around the support structure of the viewing platform, while his tentacles reached for the command controls that Vextar had been using to monitor the demonstration. "Now, Tommy!" Keth Moran called out as chaos erupted around them. Tommy pulled out their modified datapad and sprinted toward the arena's control station. Guards moved to intercept him, but they were focused on the massive serpent threatening their commander and didn't pay enough attention to one small human. "Foy." Tommy reached the control panel and jammed their hacking device into the system's access port. Instantly, the ship's computers began uploading everything: navigation data, prisoner locations, fleet positions, and most importantly, a broad-spectrum distress signal broadcasting their location to every human ship within 100 light-years. "Stop him," screamed one of the High Council members, but it was too late. Throughout the ship, emergency systems activated as Tommy's virus spread through the computer network. Weapon systems shut down, shields collapsed, and most critically, the prison cells holding the human captives unlocked automatically. In the arena, Keth Moran had reached Commander Vextar and wrapped one massive coil around the Zephyrian's torso. But instead of crushing him, the serpent held him carefully, threatening but not yet lethal. "Attention, Zephyrian Empire." Keth Moran's voice boomed through the arena's sound system. "I am Keth Moran, last survivor of Zenthara, and I am no longer your weapon. I choose my own destiny and I choose freedom." The crowd erupted in panic as guards rushed toward both Tommy and Keth Moran. But they were too late, the damage was done. Throughout the ship, hundreds of human prisoners were breaking free from their cells, led by Mrs. Henderson and the other adults Tommy had secretly organized. "You made one critical error," Tommy called out to the High Council as he completed the upload. "You taught us about your technology, your ships, your weaknesses. You gave us access to everything we needed to escape." One of the council members, an ancient female with elaborate golden scales, stepped forward. "You are children and primitives. Even free, you cannot escape this system. Our fleets will hunt you down." "Maybe," Tommy admitted, "but we won't be alone." As if summoned by his words, new signals began appearing on the arena's main display screen. Human ships, dozens of them, dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. The distress signal had reached more than just nearby patrols. It had reached a full human rescue fleet that had been searching for the lost colonists for weeks. "Impossible," breathed Commander Vextar from within Kethmoran's coils. "How did they find us so quickly?" Tommy smiled, the expression carrying more confidence than any 12-year-old should possess. "Because humans never abandon their own, and when you take one of us, you better be prepared to fight all of us." In the distance, the first human fighters were already engaging the Zephyrian defense fleet. The sound of battle echoed through the ship's hull as years of suppressed rage finally found its target. Kethmoran carefully released Commander Vextar and turned toward Tommy. "What now, my friend?" Tommy looked around the arena, at the panicking nobles, at the arriving human ships, at his serpentine friend who had chosen freedom over slavery. "Now we go home. All of us." 3 hours later, the rescue was complete. Every human prisoner had been evacuated to the safety of the fleet, and Kethmoran had been offered sanctuary aboard the flagship. The Zephyrian prison ship drifted powerless in space, its crew too stunned to mount effective resistance. As Tommy stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching the stars wheel past at hyperspace velocities, he felt Kethmoran's massive presence beside him. "Where will you go now?" Tommy asked his friend. "You're free to choose anywhere in the galaxy." Kethmoran's amber eyes reflected the starfield ahead. "I think," he said thoughtfully, "I would like to see this school you told me about. I have much to learn about living in peace." Tommy grinned and reached up to touch his friend's scales. "I think you'll love it, and I think you'll have a lot to teach them too." Behind them, the rescued colonists were already planning their return to their homeworld, carrying with them the knowledge that even in the darkest circumstances, intelligence and friendship could triumph over brute force. The galaxy would never be quite the same. After all, the universe had just learned what happened when you tried to turn a human child's best friend into a weapon. The lesson would not be quickly forgotten. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Tommy and Kethmoran had transformed their quarters into something resembling a classroom mixed with a war room. Star charts covered the walls, mathematical equations were scratched into the floor, and datapads containing stolen information were carefully hidden throughout their space. Tommy had kept his word to Commander Vextar, teaching Kethmoran everything the Zephyrian wanted: military strategy, ship operations, galactic politics, and advanced combat techniques. But he had also taught him things Vextar never requested: human philosophy, the concept of individual rights, the history of successful revolutions, and most importantly, how to question authority. Today we're going to learn about something called creative problem solving, Tommy announced as he pulled up a new lesson on his datapad. "It's when you find solutions that nobody expects." Kethmoran settled into his usual learning position, coiled in a comfortable spiral with his massive head at Tommy's eye level. His pronunciation had become almost perfect, with only a slight musical accent remaining from his native language. "Give me an example," the serpent requested. This had become their routine. Tommy would introduce a concept, and Kethmoran would immediately want to explore its applications. "Well," Tommy said with a mischievous grin, "let's say you were a prisoner on a ship and you wanted to escape. The obvious solution would be to fight your way out, right?" "Correct. Use superior strength to overcome obstacles and neutralize guards." "But that's obvious. Everyone would expect that from someone like you. So what if instead you made your captors think you were exactly what they wanted you to be, while secretly preparing for something completely different?" Kethmoran's eyes gleamed with understanding, like appearing to be a perfect weapon while actually planning rebellion. "Exactly. And the best part is, the more they trust you, the more access you get to important information and locations." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Vextar, who entered their quarters with obvious satisfaction. He had been visiting regularly to observe Kethmoran's progress, and each time he seemed more pleased with the results. Impressive as always, Vextar hissed as he reviewed the equations covering the floor. Kethmoran, demonstrate your understanding of ship navigation systems. The Serpent smoothly recited complex stellar navigation principles, tactical formation strategies, and detailed knowledge of Zephyrian fleet operations. Every answer was perfect, showing exactly the kind of advanced military thinking that Vextar wanted to present to the High Council. Excellent, the commander said with genuine pride. And your loyalty protocols? I serve the Zephyrian Empire, Kethmoran replied without hesitation. My purpose is to advance Zephyrian interests and eliminate threats to Zephyrian security. Tommy had to hide a smile. They had practiced this response dozens of times, making sure Kethmoran could deliver it with perfect conviction, while meaning something entirely different. The High Council arrives tomorrow, Vextar announced. They will want to see a demonstration of your abilities. Are you prepared? I am ready to serve, Kethmoran answered. After Vextar left, Tommy and Kethmoran exchanged a meaningful look. Tomorrow would be their chance, possibly their only chance. Are you sure about this? Tommy asked quietly. Once we start, there's no going back. Kethmoran's response was to trace a symbol in the dirt, one of the first words Tommy had taught him. The symbol for freedom. That night, as the ship prepared for the arrival of the High Council, Tommy made his weekly visit to the human prisoners. The guards had grown complacent over the weeks, and Tommy had gradually built relationships with the Zephyrian soldiers assigned to escort him. Tell me about your homeworld, Tommy said to one guard as they walked through the prison section. I've learned so much about Zephyrian culture from Commander Vextar. It sounds fascinating. The guard, flattered by the boy's apparent interest, began describing the great cities of his planet. As he talked, Tommy memorized every detail: population centers, government buildings, military installations. Information that would be crucial for what was coming. In the prisoner section, Tommy moved quickly through the crowd of humans, ostensibly checking on their welfare. But what he was really doing was passing along carefully coded messages, using the simple finger spelling he had taught several of the adults weeks ago. Tomorrow, he spelled out to Mrs. Henderson, his former teacher. Be ready. Her eyes widened slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. Over the past weeks, she had helped Tommy identify the most capable adults among the prisoners: former military personnel, engineers, doctors, anyone who might be useful in an emergency. How many? She finger-spelled back. All of them, Tommy replied silently. The whole ship. By the time he returned to his quarters, every human prisoner on the ship knew that something was planned for the following day. They didn't know details, that was too dangerous, but they knew to be prepared for anything. Kethmoran was waiting for him with patient anticipation. Did you complete the preparations? Everyone's ready, Tommy confirmed. What about you? Any second thoughts? The serpent's massive form shifted, and for a moment Tommy could see past the gentle creature he had come to know, to the legendary warrior underneath. I have been a slave for 50 years, Kethmoran said quietly. I will not be one for 51. Tommy nodded and pulled out their most important tool, a data pad that they had been secretly modifying for weeks. To any observer, it looked like a standard educational device. In reality, it was now a sophisticated hacking tool, capable of interfacing with Zephyrian computer systems. The ship's main computer core is in the command section, Tommy said, reviewing their stolen blueprints one more time. If we can get there during the demonstration, we will have perhaps 10 minutes before they realize what is happening, Kethmoran finished. Long enough to download the navigation data and broadcast our location to human space, and long enough to disable their weapon systems, Tommy added. Your people might be warriors, but they're not the only ones who know how to fight. They spent the rest of the night reviewing their plan, checking every detail, preparing for every contingency they could imagine. By dawn, they were as ready as they could possibly be. Outside their quarters, the ship buzzed with activity as the crew prepared for the High Council's arrival. In a few hours, Commander Vextar would present his ultimate weapon to the most powerful beings in the Zephyrian Empire. What he didn't know was that his weapon had learned to think for itself, and it had very different plans for the demonstration. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humans and their friends decided they had been prisoners long enough. 2 days later, everything changed. Tommy was in the middle of teaching Kethmoran about human mathematics when the pit's elevator platform descended, carrying Commander Vextar himself. The Zephyrian leader stepped onto the pit floor with confidence, though Tommy noticed he kept several armed guards on the platform above. "Remarkable," Vextar hissed as he approached. "Simply remarkable. In 3 days you have accomplished what we could not in 50 years. Kethmoran's massive form coiled protectively around Tommy, but the boy placed a calming hand on his friend's scales. "It's okay," he whispered. "Let's see what he wants." The commander studied them both with calculating yellow eyes. "I have been watching your lessons. The beast shows intelligence we never suspected." "His name is Kethmoran," Tommy said firmly. "And he was never stupid. You just never tried to talk to him like a person." Vextar's neck frill fluttered with what might have been amusement. Straight to the point. "I admire that in humans." "Very well, Kethmoran, then." He pronounced the name with surprising accuracy. "I have a proposition." Tommy felt his stomach clench with worry. Nothing good ever came from alien commanders making propositions to prisoners. "The High Council grows impatient with our current entertainment methods," Vextar continued. "They want to see the Dev, Kethmoran, fight in the great arena on our homeworld. But I believe there is a better way to demonstrate our power." The Serpent's eyes narrowed dangerously, remembering too many forced battles, too many deaths for the amusement of crowds. "What if," Vextar said slowly, "instead of displaying brute violence, we showed them something unprecedented? What if we demonstrated that we have tamed not just the body, but the mind of the galaxy's most feared predator?" Tommy's blood ran cold. "You want to use him as a trick, like a trained animal in a circus. Think bigger, child." The commander began pacing around them, his claws clicking on the stone floor. "Imagine the Galactic Council's reaction when they see Kethmoran speaking, reading, following complex orders. They will realize that if we can control such a creature completely, no rebellion stands a chance." Kethmoran rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that made the guards above shift nervously. Tommy could feel his friend's anger building. "But here's where it becomes interesting for you," Vextar continued. "I need you to continue his education. Not just reading in simple words, but advanced concepts, strategy, technology, cultural knowledge. Make him the perfect weapon of the mind." "And if I refuse?" Tommy asked, though he already knew the answer. Vextar's smile was cold as space. "Then you join the other human prisoners in the mining colonies, and Kethmoran returns to his old life of fighting in the arena until something eventually kills him." The choice was clear, but it felt like a trap. Tommy looked up at his massive friend, seeing the pain in those ancient amber eyes. Kethmoran had been a weapon for so long. How could Tommy help turn him into an even more dangerous one? But then Tommy had an idea. A dangerous, crazy idea that just might work. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll teach him everything you want. But I have conditions." Vextar's eyes widened slightly. He had not expected negotiation from a 12-year-old prisoner. "You are hardly in a position to make demands, child." "Actually, I think I am." Tommy stood up straighter, channeling every bit of courage his parents had ever taught him. "You need me to make this work. Without me, Kethmoran goes back to being just another arena fighter. With me, you get your ultimate weapon." The commander considered this, his forked tongue flicking out thoughtfully. "What do you want?" "Better conditions. Real food for both of us. Books and learning materials, and..." Tommy took a deep breath. "I want to visit the other human prisoners. To see that they're being treated fairly." Absolutely not. You could pass messages, organize resistance." "I'm 12 years old," Tommy protested. "What kind of resistance am I going to organize? I just want to make sure my people are okay. If you want me to focus on teaching, I need to know they're safe." Vextar studied the boy's face, looking for deception. What he saw instead was genuine concern, and a surprising amount of steel for someone so young. "You would trade your cooperation for the welfare of other prisoners?" "That's what humans do," Tommy said simply. "We take care of each other." Behind him, Kethmoran watched the exchange with growing understanding. This small being was not just brave, he was strategically brilliant. In a few sentences, he had turned their captivity into a negotiation. "Very well," Vextar said after a long pause. "Better quarters, proper food, educational materials. and supervised visits to the other humans once per week. But if you attempt any form of communication beyond basic welfare checks— I understand, Tommy interrupted. I keep my part of the deal, you keep yours. The commander nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. Your new quarters will be prepared within the hour. The real education begins tomorrow. As Vextar departed, Tommy felt Kethmoran's massive head lower next to him. The serpent spoke quietly in his musical language, and Tommy had learned enough to understand the basic meaning. Why did you help me? It puts you in danger. Tommy turned to face his friend, placing both hands on the warm scales of the great creature's snout. Because that's what friends do. And because I have a plan. Kethmoran's eyes brightened with curiosity, and he made the questioning sound that Tommy had learned meant, tell me more. They want me to make you into the perfect weapon, Tommy whispered, glancing up to make sure the guards weren't listening. But what they don't realize is that the more I teach you, the more you'll remember who you really are. And the more you remember, the more you'll want your freedom. Understanding dawned in the serpent's ancient eyes. The child wasn't just teaching him to read, he was teaching him to think for himself again. They think they're using us, Tommy continued, but really, we're using them. Every lesson makes you stronger, smarter, more yourself, and eventually— He didn't need to finish the sentence. Kethmoran understood completely. Eventually, the student would surpass the teacher, and the weapon would remember how to choose its own targets. That evening, in their new quarters, a much larger chamber with actual furniture and proper lighting, Tommy and Kethmoran began planning their real education. Not the one Vextar wanted, but the one that would ultimately set them both free. Tommy pulled up star charts on his datapad, showing Kethmoran the layout of known space. This is where we are now, he explained, pointing to the Zephyrian home system. And this is where we need to go. Kethmoran studied the display with intense concentration. His species had once been great navigators, and some of that knowledge still remained buried in his genetic memory. But first, Tommy said, we need to learn everything we can about this ship, about their technology, about their weaknesses. Are you ready to become a student again? A real student, not just a weapon? The serpent's response was to carefully trace symbols in the air, symbols that Tommy was beginning to recognize as the written form of yes, always, and freedom. The most dangerous? Education in galactic history was about to begin, and neither Vextar nor the Zephyrian High Council had any idea what they had truly set in motion. Outside their quarters, guards reported that the prisoner and the beast seemed to be adapting well to their new arrangement. What they didn't report was the soft sound of voices deep into the night, speaking in two languages that were slowly becoming one shared tongue of liberation. The revolution would be led by a 12-year-old boy and the last survivor of a dead civilization, and it would begin with the simple act of learning to read. A full day had passed since Tommy's arrival in the pit, and word of the impossible scene had spread throughout the Zephyrian ship. Guards found excuses to patrol near the viewing area, and even some of the prisoners had been brought to witness what their captors called the human witch child who tamed the devourer. Tommy woke up curled against the serpent's warm coils, feeling safer than he had since his capture. The devourer had carefully positioned itself to shelter the boy during sleep, creating a protective barrier against the cold stone walls. Good morning, Tommy said with a yawn, stretching his small arms. Good morning, the serpent replied, its pronunciation much clearer after hours of practice. The creature's massive head turned toward him with obvious pleasure at successfully using the greeting. A metal platform descended from above, carrying basic food and water. Commander Vextar had decided that keeping the child alive served his purposes, though he had not explained his reasoning to the crew. Tommy shared his meal with the devourer, breaking his bread into pieces and offering them to his friend. The serpent accepted graciously, though Tommy suspected it was more about the gesture than actual hunger. Creatures this size probably needed much larger meals. Today let's work on bigger words, Tommy suggested, pulling out his datapad. I want to teach you about emotions. Those are feelings that thinking beings have. The serpent's eyes focused intently on the screen as Tommy scrolled to a children's book about emotions. Simple illustrations showed faces expressing different feelings: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, love. This is happy, Tommy said, pointing to a smiling face. It's how you feel when good things happen, Like when you learned your first word yesterday, I was happy, and I think you were too. The devourer studied the image carefully, then made the sound, happy. It then looked directly at Tommy and repeated the word, pointing one tentacle at itself. The meaning was unmistakable. It was happy now. Yes, Tommy laughed. You're happy. That's wonderful. They worked through other emotions, sad, angry, scared, excited. With each one, the serpent seemed to make connections to its own experiences. When they reached lonely, the creature's great form sagged slightly and it traced melancholy symbols in the dirt. You were lonely for a long time, Tommy said gently. But you're not alone anymore. I'm here and I'm your friend. The word friend had become the devourer's favorite. It repeated it often, seeming to take comfort in the concept. In its own language, it began teaching Tommy the equivalent word, a beautiful flowing symbol that meant bond of minds. As the lesson continued, Tommy noticed they had an audience. Through the transparent barrier that separated the pit from the observation area, dozens of Zephyrian faces watched in fascination. Some showed fear, others curiosity, but all seemed amazed by what they were witnessing. They're all watching us, Tommy observed. I think they've never seen anything like this before. The devourer followed his gaze upward and hissed softly at their observers. But when Tommy placed a calming hand on its scales, the creature settled down immediately. Don't be angry at them, Tommy said. They don't understand that you're not just a monster. They've never seen the real you, the smart, kind person you actually are. The concept of being misunderstood resonated deeply with the serpent. It began tracing new symbols, and Tommy could sense frustration and old pain in the flowing script. You want them to know who you really are? Tommy guessed. The devourer nodded emphatically, then began a longer piece of writing. This time the symbols seemed to tell a complete story. Tommy watched, wishing desperately that he could read the ancient language fluently. An idea struck him. What if I could translate for you? What if I could tell them your story in words they understand? The serpent's eyes lit up with excitement. It began writing more urgently, creating what looked like an entire page of flowing script. Tommy studied the symbols carefully, trying to remember the lessons he had received. Slowly, with the devourer's patient guidance, he began to piece together the meaning. It was a story of loss and sorrow, how the creature's people had been scholars and artists, how they had valued knowledge above all else. The war that destroyed their civilization had been brutal and sudden, leaving the devourer as the sole survivor of its species. You weren't always a fighter, Tommy said as understanding dawned. You became one because you had to survive. The serpent nodded sadly, then continued its story. The Zephyrians had found it wounded and desperate on the ruins of its homeworld. Instead of showing mercy, they had captured it and turned it into entertainment, forcing it to fight for their amusement. They took away everything that made you who you were, Tommy said with growing anger. They made you forget that you were more than just a weapon. Above them, Commander Vextar watched the exchange with calculating eyes. He was beginning to understand that the devourer's value lay not in its ability to kill, but in its intelligence. A thinking weapon that could communicate and plan would be far more useful than a mindless beast. Tommy stood up and looked directly at the observation deck. His young voice carried clearly in the enclosed space as he began to speak, not to the serpent but to their audience. This is Devourer, he called out, using the only name he knew for his friend. But that's not really his name. That's just what you call him because you're afraid. His real name is Beautiful, like his language, like his people were. The Zephyrians leaned forward, listening despite themselves to the small human's words. He's not a monster, Tommy continued. He's the last living library of an entire civilization. He knows things about art and science and philosophy that died with his world. He could teach you things you've never imagined if you'd just listen. The serpent watched in amazement as this small being defended it, spoke for it, gave voice to feelings it had kept buried for decades. No one had ever stood up for the devourer before. You think humans are weak because we're small? Tommy said, his voice growing stronger. But we're not weak. We're survivors, and we take care of our friends no matter how big or scary they look to everyone else. The boy turned back to the serpent and smiled. What's your real name? Your name from before? The creature considered for a moment, then spoke a word in its own language. A sound like singing wind and distant thunder. Kethmaran. Keth Moran, Tommy repeated carefully. That's your real name. That's who you really are. The serpent's eyes glowed with something that might have been tears as it heard its true name spoken aloud for the first time in 50 years. In that moment, surrounded by enemies but defended by one small human friend, Keth Moran began to remember what it felt like to be a person rather than a weapon. The transformation was far from over, but the most important step had been taken. The creature had reclaimed its identity, and with it, its hope for something better than mere survival. Above them, Commander Vextar made another decision that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. This human child had accomplished in one day what years of torture and conditioning had failed to achieve. Perhaps it was time to try a different approach to controlling their most valuable asset. 3 hours had passed since Tommy was thrown into the pit, and the Zephyrian nobles had long since departed in disgust. Only Commander Vextar and a handful of guards remained, watching in amazement as the legendary killer continued its reading lesson with a human child. Tommy had positioned himself comfortably against one of the Devourer's massive coils, using the creature's body as a backrest while he held up the datapad. The serpent had curved its enormous form into a protective circle around the boy, its great head lowered to study the glowing screen. Okay, now let's try putting letters together to make words, Tommy explained patiently. See, CAT spells cat. That's an animal from my world. Small and furry with 4 legs. The Devourer studied the combination of letters intently, then made the sounds slowly. Ka, ta, cat. Its pronunciation was getting clearer with practice, though still heavily accented by its alien vocal structure. Tommy clapped again. Perfect. You're getting really good at this. The serpent's eyes brightened with what could only be described as happiness. It had forgotten the joy of learning, of understanding new concepts and expanding its knowledge. For decades, it had been reduced to nothing more than a weapon of fear, its considerable intelligence ignored and wasted. Now, let me teach you about my people, Tommy said, scrolling through the datapad's memory banks. These are called humans. We come from a planet called Earth, but now we live on lots of different worlds. He showed the serpent pictures from his colony. Bustling markets, children playing in parks, families working together in gardens. The Devourer studied each image with fascination, its tentacle gently touching the screen as if trying to reach through it. We're not all the same, Tommy continued. See, different colors and sizes and shapes. But we all learn and love and take care of each other. That's what makes us human. The serpent made a low, rumbling sound that might have been approval. It began tracing symbols in the dirt again, but this time they were different, more organized, more deliberate. Tommy leaned forward to look. Are you writing about your people? The Devourer nodded and continued its careful script. The symbols seemed to flow like water, telling a story that Tommy couldn't read but somehow felt in his heart. When the serpent finished, it looked at the boy expectantly. I wish I could understand it, Tommy said softly, but I can tell it's important to you. Will you teach me? Above them, Commander Vextar spoke quietly to his remaining guards. This changes everything. If the Devourer can be educated, controlled through communication rather than fear. Sir, interrupted a guard, the High Council will not approve of this. They want the beast to remain savage for the arena fights. Vextar's eyes glowed with ambition. The High Council doesn't understand strategy. A thinking weapon is infinitely more valuable than a mindless one. Let the child continue. Down in the pit, Tommy was learning his first words in the ancient language of Zenthara. The Devourer was a patient teacher, guiding the boy's finger through the flowing script and correcting his pronunciation with gentle nudges. Your language is beautiful, Tommy said in wonder. It looks like art. The serpent's massive form seemed to swell with pride. In the old days before the war, its people had been renowned throughout the galaxy for their poetry and philosophy. Their written language was considered one of the most elegant forms of communication ever developed. Tell me about your world, Tommy requested. What was it like before? The Devourer paused, then began a new series of symbols. This time, the story was longer and more complex. Tommy watched as images took shape in the carefully traced script. Great cities that seemed to grow like living things. Beings of wisdom and knowledge who sought understanding rather than conquest. It sounds wonderful, Tommy said when the serpent finished. I'm sorry it's gone. The creature's great head lowered until it was almost touching the boy. For a moment, its amber eyes showed the weight of years and loss. Then gently it nuzzled Tommy with the side of its massive head. The gesture was so tender, so clearly an expression of gratitude and affection, that even the hardened Zephyrian guards above stepped back in shock. The devourer, their ultimate weapon of terror, was showing love to a human child. Tommy reached up and placed his small hand on the serpent's snout. The scales were warm and surprisingly smooth, with tiny patterns that caught the light like jewels. "We're friends now," he said simply, "and friends take care of each other." The devourer understood the word friends from their lesson, and it repeated the sound carefully. "Fur-ends. That's right. You and me, we're friends." The serpent began to hum, a low musical sound that resonated through its massive body. Tommy felt the vibrations through the coil he was leaning against, and he realized the creature was expressing contentment, maybe even happiness, you know, Tommy said thoughtfully. "Where I come from, we have schools, places where people go to learn new things. I bet you'd love a school." The devourer's eyes lit up at the concept. It had been so long since it had been around other thinking beings, other minds that sought knowledge and growth. The idea of a place dedicated to learning sounded like paradise. Tommy scrolled through more files on his datapad, finding pictures of classrooms and libraries. "Look, this is where children learn to read and write and understand the world. And this is a library. It has thousands and thousands of books, all full of different stories and ideas." The serpent studied the images with intense longing. It began tracing new symbols, and Tommy recognized what looked like questions in the flowing script. "You want to know if you could go to a school someday?" Tommy guessed. The devourer nodded eagerly, then looked around the pit with obvious sadness. The message was clear. How could such a thing ever be possible for a creature locked away as a monster? Tommy's young mind began working on the problem. He had always been good at puzzles, at finding solutions that adults missed. There had to be a way to help his new friend. "Maybe we can't get you to a school," he said slowly. "But maybe we can bring school to you. I could teach you everything I know, and you could teach me your language. We could learn together." The idea seemed to energize the devourer completely. It began moving around the pit with newfound purpose, using its tentacles to clear away bones and debris. Within minutes, it had created a clean space in the center where they could continue their lessons properly. Tommy watched in amazement as the serpent carefully arranged stones to form a makeshift desk and seating area. Despite its massive size and fearsome appearance, the creature moved with delicate precision, showing care and intelligence in every action. "You really are amazing," Tommy said with genuine admiration. "I can't wait to learn more from you." The devourer settled into position around their new classroom, its eyes bright with anticipation. For the first time in decades, it had something to look forward to beyond mere survival. It had purpose again. Above them, Commander Vextar made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He turned to his guards with new orders. "Bring the child food and water, and find me everything in our databases about human educational methods. If we're going to weaponize intelligence, we need to understand how humans learn." The devourer had not heard gentle words in over 50 years. The last time someone had spoken to it without fear was on its homeworld of Zenthara, before the Great War that destroyed everything it had ever known. The memory stirred something deep within its ancient consciousness. Tommy watched the massive serpent's eyes carefully. He had noticed how they changed when he mentioned loneliness, a slight dimming almost like sadness. His mother had taught him that intelligence always showed in the eyes no matter what species you were looking at. "I lost my family too," Tommy said softly. "The Zephyrians took them away from me. I don't know if I'll ever see them again." The creature's great head lowered slightly, bringing its face closer to Tommy's level. This close, the boy could see intricate patterns in the scales around its eyes, markings that reminded him of the script he had seen in his mother's xenobiology books. Above them, the Zephyrian nobles grew restless. Their hisses of confusion echoed off the pit walls. This was not the entertainment they had been promised. Where was the terror? Where was the blood? "Make it attack!" demanded one noble, his neck frill flared in anger. "We came to see death, not conversation." But Commander Vextar remained silent, studying the scene below with calculating eyes. He had captured the devourer himself during the conquest of Zenthara. He knew it was more than just a mindless beast, though he had spent years trying to turn it into one. Tommy reached slowly into his pocket, moving carefully to avoid startling the serpent. The guards had searched him for weapons but had not bothered to take his few personal belongings. He pulled out a small datapad, the kind children used for schoolwork. The screen was cracked from his rough treatment, but it still worked. "This is how my people share knowledge," Tommy explained, holding up the device. "We write things down so we can remember them and teach others." The Devourer's eyes focused on the glowing screen with intense interest. It had been so long since it had seen any form of written communication. On Zenthara, its people had been great scholars and philosophers before the war reduced them to myths and legends. Tommy activated the device and showed the serpent a simple children's book that was stored in its memory. The colorful pictures and large text were designed for young learners. "This is called reading," he said. "See how these symbols make words? And the words tell stories?" The massive creature studied the screen with fascination. Its own people had used similar concepts, though their written language was far more complex. Slowly, carefully, it extended one of its smaller, tentacle-like appendages toward the datapad. Tommy didn't flinch as the tentacle touched the screen. The appendage was surprisingly gentle, with small, sensitive pads at its tip that could detect the finest details. "You want to try?" Tommy asked. The crowd above erupted in angry hisses. This was unprecedented. No one had ever seen the Devourer show interest in anything except violence and feeding. "End this nonsense," shouted a noble. "Drop energy weapons into the pit. Force it to attack." But Commander Vextar raised his hand for silence. His military mind was working through the implications of what he was seeing. A controllable Devourer would be far more valuable than a mindlessly violent one. Perhaps this human child was providing an unexpected opportunity. Tommy began pointing to different letters on the screen, saying their sounds out loud. "This is A, it makes an ah sound. And this is B, it sounds like bew." The Devourer listened intently, its great intelligence focusing on these simple concepts like a powerful computer analyzing new data. It had been starved of mental stimulation for so long that even basic learning felt like water to a creature dying of thirst. After a few minutes of this, something remarkable happened. The serpent made a sound, not a hiss or roar, but a careful attempt to mimic the ah sound Tommy had demonstrated. It was rough and distorted by the creature's alien vocal cords, but the intent was unmistakable. Tommy's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Yes, you've got it. You're learning." For the first time since his capture, Tommy forgot to be afraid. This was like helping his little sister with her homework, or working with the colony children who struggled with reading. It felt normal and good and human. The Devourer seemed to sense the boy's joy, and something that might have been pleasure rippled through its massive form. It had not brought happiness to another living being in longer than it cared to remember. The sensation was intoxicating. "Let's try another one," Tommy said, scrolling to a different letter. "This is S. It makes a S sound. Like you do when you hiss." The serpent's attempt at the S sound was much more successful, and Tommy clapped his hands in encouragement. The creature's eyes seemed to brighten with something that looked remarkably like pride. Above them, the Zephyrian nobles were growing increasingly agitated. This was not what they had paid to see. Some began to leave, muttering about wasted time and disappointing entertainment. But a few remained, including Commander Vextar, who watched with growing fascination. The legendary Devourer, terror of a dozen star systems, was learning to read from a human child. The strategic possibilities were staggering. As the lesson continued, Tommy began to notice other things about his pupil. The serpent was incredibly quick to learn, grasping concepts that took most children weeks to understand. More importantly, it seemed genuinely grateful for the attention and mental stimulation. "You're really smart," Tommy said admiringly, "probably smarter than most of my teachers back home. I bet you know lots of things I don't." The Devourer paused in its letter practice and looked directly at Tommy. For a moment, boy and serpent simply regarded each other across the vast gap of species and experience. In that moment, neither was predator nor prey. They were simply two intelligent beings sharing knowledge. The serpent began to trace something in the dirt with its tentacle, symbols that were definitely not from Tommy's alphabet. They were flowing and elegant, with curves and spirals that seemed to tell a story all their own. Tommy leaned forward eagerly. "Is that your writing? From your world?" The creature's massive head nodded slowly. and it continued to trace symbols while making soft sounds that might have been its own language. For the first time in decades, the devourer was teaching instead of destroying. The foundation of an impossible friendship had been laid in the depths of an alien prison ship. The metal floor felt cold against Tommy's bare feet as the alien guards shoved him forward. His small 12-year-old frame stumbled, but he refused to cry. The Zephyrians towered above him, their scaled blue skin gleaming under the harsh artificial lights of their prison ship. Their yellow eyes showed no mercy, only cruel amusement. "This one is too small to be useful in the mines," hissed Commander Vextar, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. "What use is a human child?" Tommy had been captured 3 days ago when the Zephyrian raiders attacked his colony on Kepler 442b. His parents had hidden him in the storage cellar, but the aliens found him anyway. Now he was one of hundreds of humans being transported to their homeworld as slaves. "The devourer grows hungry," said another guard, this one with more scars across his reptilian face. "It has not fed in weeks." The elders grow impatient. Commander Vextar's eyes lit up with wicked delight. "Perfect. This small one will make an excellent offering. It will show the other humans what happens to those who resist." Tommy didn't understand all their words, but he caught enough. They were planning to feed him to something called the Devourer. His heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. His father had always told him that humans were survivors, that they could adapt to anything. The ship's corridor stretched endlessly, filled with the sounds of machinery and the occasional roar from somewhere deep below. Other human prisoners watched from behind energy barriers as Tommy was marched past. Their faces showed pity and fear. Some of the adults tried to reach through the barriers, shouting his name, but the guards pushed them back with electric prods. "Don't be afraid, Tommy," called out Mrs. Henderson, his old teacher. "Remember what we learned about being brave." But Tommy wasn't thinking about being brave. He was thinking about the nature documentaries his mother used to show him. She was a xenobiologist before the colony was established, and she had taught him that every creature, no matter how dangerous, had patterns and needs. Everything could be understood if you watched carefully enough. The guards led him down a spiral ramp that descended into the ship's lower levels. The air grew warmer and more humid. Strange smells filled his nostrils, something like wet earth mixed with the sharp scent of reptile musk. Dim red lights cast eerie shadows on the walls. "The Devourer has killed 17 Zephyrian warriors in combat," bragged one guard. "It is the last of its kind, captured on the dead world of Zenthara. We keep it hungry so it stays fierce." "This human child will barely be a snack," laughed another. They reached a massive circular chamber carved from black stone. In the center sat an enormous pit, maybe 30 feet across, with walls that curved inward like a bowl. The bottom was hidden in shadow, but Tommy could hear something moving down there, something big. Around the pit's edge stood dozens of Zephyrian nobles in elaborate robes, their neck frills extended in excitement. They whispered among themselves in their hissing language, pointing at Tommy with their clawed fingers. "Behold," announced Commander Vextar to the gathered crowd. "Fresh meat for the Devourer. Let this human child's death remind all humans of their place in our empire." A mechanical platform lowered from the ceiling. The guards forced Tommy onto it, binding his hands with energy shackles that glowed blue. The platform began to descend into the pit, while the Zephyrians above cheered and hissed their approval. As Tommy dropped lower, he could make out the pit's contents. Bones littered the floor. Some looked humanoid. Others were clearly from various alien species. In the center of this grim collection, a massive form stirred. The creature that emerged from the shadows was unlike anything Tommy had ever seen. It looked like a cross between a python and a dragon, easily 40 feet long and as thick as a tree trunk. Its scales were deep purple with silver markings that seemed to shift in the dim light. Multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth filled its mouth, and its eyes glowed like amber lanterns. The Devourer reared up as the platform touched the pit floor, its massive head swaying hypnotically. The crowd above fell silent, waiting for the inevitable attack. This was their entertainment, their demonstration of power. But Tommy did something unexpected. Instead of running or screaming, he sat down cross-legged on the platform and looked directly at the creature. His mother had taught him that eye contact was important with intelligent predators. You had to show respect, not fear. The Devourer paused, its great head tilting slightly. It had expected panic, the usual terror that made the kill exciting. This small creature's calm behavior confused it. "Hello," Tommy said quietly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. My name is Tommy. I know you're supposed to eat me, but I was wondering if we could talk first. The serpent's eyes narrowed, studying this strange little being. In all its years of captivity, no prey had ever spoken to it so calmly. Most screamed and ran, making the hunt enjoyable. A few had tried to fight, which was amusing in its own way. But this was something entirely new. Above them, the Zephyrians began to mutter in confusion. Why wasn't the child being devoured immediately? Some called for the guards to prod the serpent with their electric weapons, but Commander Vexitar held up a clawed hand. Wait, he hissed. This could be even more entertaining. Let the beast play with its food. Tommy kept talking, his voice soft but clear. I know you're probably really lonely down here. I would be lonely too if I was the last of my kind. That must be really hard. The devourer's massive form settled slightly, coiling around itself but keeping its head raised. Something in the child's tone was different from the usual pleas for mercy. There was no begging, no promises of reward, just simple acknowledgement of its existence as more than just a monster. I bet you're really smart, Tommy continued. My mom always said that the biggest predators were usually the smartest ones too. They had to be to survive. For the first time in decades, the devourer found itself curious about its prey rather than simply hungry. This small creature spoke of intelligence and loneliness as if it understood such concepts. The serpent's ancient mind, dulled by years of captivity and violence, began to stir with something it had almost forgotten: interest in communication rather than just consumption. The stage was set for something unprecedented in Zephyrian history.